The elder's voice cuts through the hall. A half-human cannot inherit the alpha title. 7 young wolves rise in defiance, facing down tradition to protect their pregnant human mother. The Alpha King's power fills the room, deadly, absolute. One wrong word and blood spills. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. The avalanche had come without warning, a thundering wall of snow and ice that swept down the mountain and buried everything in its path. Sage Winterborn had been hiking the northern ridge when she heard it. That terrible roar that meant death was racing toward the valley below. She'd thrown herself behind a massive boulder and prayed to whatever gods might be listening as the world turned white and violent around her. When the silence finally came, it was absolute and eerie. Sage emerged from her shelter shaking, covered in powder, her ears ringing from the thunder that had just passed. The entire landscape had been transformed. What had been a forested valley was now a smooth, white slope, beautiful and deadly. She should turn back, should head to the ranger station and report what she'd seen. But something made her pause. A sound, faint and desperate, coming from somewhere beneath all that snow. Whimpering, high-pitched and terrified, and unmistakably alive. Sage began to dig, her hands burning with cold as she clawed through the snow, following that sound. Her fingers hit something solid, and she cleared away more snow, revealing a hollowed-out space beneath a fallen tree. The trunk had created a small air pocket, and huddled inside were 7 wolf pups, so young their eyes were barely open, shivering and crying for a mother who would never come. They couldn't have been more than 2 weeks old, their fur still downy and soft, their bodies fragile and trembling. Around them lay the broken body of an adult female wolf, clearly their mother, who had tried to shield them with her own body when the avalanche hit. Sage felt tears freeze on her cheeks as she looked at the dead mother wolf and her 7 surviving pups. They shouldn't be here. Wolves didn't den this high on the mountain, not in winter, not where avalanches were common. Something had driven this mother here, some desperation or danger that had made her choose this unsafe location. And now she was dead, and her pups were orphaned, and they would freeze within hours if Sage didn't do something. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. Wolf pups were wild animals, dangerous even at this age, and interfering with nature was never wise. But looking at those tiny creatures, hearing their desperate cries, feeling the weight of their mother's sacrifice, Sage knew she couldn't walk away. She shed her heavy winter coat, wrapped it around all 7 pups, creating a warm bundle, and began the long trek down the mountain. The pups squirmed against her chest, their small bodies generating surprising heat, their cries gradually quieting as they pressed against her warmth. It took 3 hours to reach her cabin, a small, isolated dwelling she'd been renting for the past 6 months while she worked on her wildlife photography portfolio. She'd come to these mountains to escape, to heal from a brutal divorce that had left her feeling broken and worthless. Her ex-husband had made it very clear that she was too soft, too emotional, too focused on rescuing things instead of building a proper career. He'd wanted a wife who enhanced his image, who could network and socialize and help him climb the corporate ladder. Instead, he'd gotten Sage, who would rather spend her days in the wilderness photographing animals than attending cocktail parties and making small talk. The divorce had been ugly, public, and humiliating. He'd made sure everyone knew she was the problem, that her inability to be what he needed had destroyed their marriage. She'd fled to these mountains 6 months ago, trying to put the pieces of herself back together in solitude. And now, somehow, she'd ended up with 7 orphaned wolf pups who needed her to be stronger than she felt. Sage set up a makeshift den in her bathroom, the warmest room in the cabin, lining a large box with blankets and carefully placing each pup inside. They were so tiny, so fragile, their eyes barely slits, their ears still folded. The largest was maybe 2 pounds, the smallest barely more than 1. She had no idea how to care for wolf pups, had no supplies or knowledge or support, but she had the internet, determination born of desperation, and a heart that had never learned how to give up on creatures that needed help. She spent the next hour researching frantically, learning that wolf pups this young needed to be fed every 2 to 3 hours, needed their bellies rubbed to stimulate digestion, needed constant warmth and care. She drove to the nearest town 40 minutes away and bought puppy formula, bottles, heating pads, more blankets, everything the website said she might need. The cashier at the pet supply store had looked at her strangely when she bought 7 of everything, but Sage didn't offer explanations. She just paid and left and drove back to her cabin as fast as the icy roads would allow. The first few days were brutal. Sage barely slept, setting alarms every 2 hours to feed the pups, to check their temperatures, to make sure they were all still breathing. She named them based on their markings and personalities. The largest male, with a distinctive dark mask across his face, became Shadow. The smallest female, with silver-tipped fur, became Luna. A male with 1 black ear and 1 white became Storm. A female with unusual golden eyes became Amber. A male who constantly whimpered became Echo. A female with a perfect white star on her chest became Nova. And the 7th, a male who seemed calm and watchful even at this age, became Sage called him Wise. She talked to them constantly as she cared. For them, narrating her actions, sharing her thoughts, telling them stories about their mother's bravery. It was easier to talk to these tiny creatures than it had been to talk to any human in months. They didn't judge her for being too emotional or too soft or too anything. They just needed her warmth and her care and her determination to keep them alive. On the 4th day, as Sage was feeding Shadow his bottle, she heard vehicles approaching her cabin. Multiple vehicles, their engines loud in the wilderness, quiet. She looked out the window and felt her blood run cold. There were 4 black SUVs parked in her driveway, and men were getting out. Big men who moved with the grace of predators, who radiated power even from a distance. And standing at the front of the group was someone who made every hair on Sage's body stand on end. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with white blonde hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes so pale they looked almost silver. He wore black clothes that probably cost more than her entire cabin, and he carried himself with the kind of absolute authority that made it clear he was used to being obeyed without question. When his gaze swept across her cabin and landed on the window where she stood, Sage felt like she'd been struck by lightning. Heat flooded through her, instant and overwhelming, her body responding to his presence in ways that made no sense. She opened the door before he could knock, still holding Shadow in one arm, the half-finished bottle in her other hand. Up close, the stranger was even more intimidating, his features sharp and aristocratic, his pale eyes intense as they focused on her face. Then his gaze dropped to the pup in her arms, and something shifted in his expression. Shock, recognition, and something that looked almost like pain. "Where did you get that pup?" he asked, his voice deep and controlled, but with an undercurrent of emotion that made Sage's instincts scream danger. "I found him, and 6 others, 4 days ago," Sage replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Their mother died in the avalanche on the North Ridge. I couldn't just leave them to freeze. 7 pups." The man's eyes flashed with something Sage couldn't identify. "You found all 7, and they're alive." "They're alive," Sage confirmed, her arms tightening protectively around Shadow. "Though I'm not sure for how much longer. I'm doing my best, but I'm not a wildlife expert, and I don't know if I'm caring for them correctly." "May I see them?" the man asked, and despite the polite phrasing, it wasn't really a question. May I see all 7? Sage hesitated, every instinct telling her that this man was dangerous, that letting him into her cabin was a terrible idea. But looking at the desperate hope in those pale eyes, the barely controlled emotion he was trying to hide, she found herself stepping aside. "Who are you?" she asked as he entered. "My name is Alexander Frostborn," he replied, moving toward the bathroom where she'd set up the makeshift den. "And those pups you found are not ordinary wolves. They're shifters, werewolves, from one of the oldest bloodlines in existence. And their mother, the wolf who died protecting them, was my sister." The words hit Sage like a physical blow. Werewolves, shifters, things that weren't supposed to exist outside of fantasy novels and movies. She should laugh, should tell him he was insane, should throw him out of her cabin. But watching him kneel beside the box of pups, watching the way his hands trembled as he gently touched each tiny head, counting them over and over like he couldn't quite believe they were real, she knew he was telling the truth. "Your sister," Sage whispered. "The mother wolf, she was your sister." "Katerina," Alexander said, his voice rough with grief. "She was the alpha female of our pack, my twin sister, my other half. She went missing 3 weeks ago with her newborn pups. We've been searching everywhere, sent out hundreds of scouts, used every resource we had. We thought she was dead, thought the pups were lost forever. And you, a human who knows nothing about our world, you saved them." He looked up at Sage, and there were tears on his face, actual tears streaming down the cheeks of this powerful, intimidating man. "You saved my family. You kept them alive when by all rights they should have died. You didn't have to. You gained nothing from it, but you did it anyway." Sage felt her own tears starting. "I couldn't just leave them," she said. "I couldn't walk away and let them die." Alexander stood, crossing the small bathroom until he was standing directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Why were you on that ridge?" he asked. "Humans don't usually hike that area. It's too remote, too dangerous. I'm a wildlife photographer," Sage explained. "I was trying to get shots of the mountain at sunrise. I didn't expect an avalanche." His pale eyes studied her face with unnerving intensity. "You're not from here. You're sent. It's wrong for this territory. You're running from something." Sage felt herself flinch. "How do you know that?" "Because I recognize the signs," Alexander said quietly. "The isolation, the cabin in the middle of nowhere, the way you flinch when I get too close, the shadows in your eyes that speak of pain you're trying to outrun. What hurt you, Sage Winterborn?" "How do you know my name?" Sage demanded, fear spiking through her. "I know everything about everyone in my territory," Alexander replied. "It's my job as Alpha King to protect my people, and that means knowing who's living in our lands. You moved here 6 months ago, you keep to yourself, you pay your rent on time, and you spend most of your days alone in the wilderness. But I didn't know why until now. Someone broke you, and you came here to hide." The accuracy of his assessment made Sage want to run, to put distance between herself and this man who saw too much. "My ex-husband," she admitted, the words spilling out, before she could stop them. "He said I was too soft, too weak, too focused on rescuing things instead of being useful. He divorced me and made sure everyone knew it was my fault." "Your ex-husband is a fool," Alexander said, with such conviction that Sage's breath caught. "You saved 7 lives that any other person would have left to die. You spent 4 days caring for creatures you didn't understand with no guarantee of success. You sacrificed your sleep and your comfort and probably your savings buying supplies for pups that aren't even your species. That's not weakness, Sage. That's extraordinary strength." The praise cracked something open in Sage's chest, something that had been frozen since her divorce, since the endless stream of criticism and dismissal she'd endured. She found herself crying, really crying, for the first time in months, and before she could stop herself, she was leaning forward, resting her forehead against Alexander's chest and letting the tears flow. He held her, his arms coming around her with surprising gentleness for someone so powerful, his hand stroking her hair as she sobbed out months of pain and loneliness and self-doubt. He didn't tell her to stop, didn't dismiss her emotions as excessive or inappropriate. He just held her and let her break apart in his arms, steady and solid and safe. When Sage finally pulled back, embarrassed by her loss of control, Alexander kept one hand on her face, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. "Don't apologize," he said before she could speak. "Don't ever apologize for feeling deeply. It's one of the most beautiful things about you." "You don't even know me," Sage protested weakly. "I know enough," Alexander replied. "I know you saved my family when you had every reason not to. I know you cared for 7 wolf pups with more dedication than most pack members would show. I know you have a heart that refuses to harden no matter how much pain you've endured. That's all I need to know." Over the next week, Alexander visited every day, always bringing members of his pack with him, wolves who would shift between human and animal form to check on the pups, to offer advice, to bring supplies. Sage learned that werewolves were real, that they lived in organized packs with complex hierarchies, that they could shift between human and wolf form at will, and that the pups she'd saved were incredibly rare and valuable. Katerina had been pregnant when she was attacked by rogues, Alexander explained one evening as they sat watching the pups sleep. She managed to escape, but she was injured, bleeding, and instead of returning to pack territory where the rogues might track her, she ran into the mountains. We think she was trying to lead them away from us, to protect the pack, even while she was dying. She must have given birth in that den, must have known she wouldn't survive, but she kept those pups alive long enough for the Avalanche to bury them, to hide them from the rogues who were hunting her. And I just happened to be there, Sage said quietly. "What are the odds of that?" Alexander looked at her with those intense pale eyes. "I don't think it was chance. I think the moon goddess, the deity who watches over all wolves, she guided you to that ridge at exactly the right moment. She made sure my sister's pups would be found by someone with the heart to save them." "The moon goddess," Sage repeated, still struggling with the reality of a world that included actual deities and divine intervention. Why would she care about me? I'm just human. "You're not just anything," Alexander said with quiet intensity. "And the fact that you keep saying that, keep diminishing yourself, tells me your ex-husband did more damage than you realize." Over the following weeks, as the pups grew stronger and more active, Sage found herself spending more and more time with Alexander. He would come to her cabin in the evenings, ostensibly to check on his nephews and nieces, but they would end up talking for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about pack politics, about the responsibilities of being alpha king, about the loneliness of leadership. She told him about her failed marriage, about her love of photography, about the peace she'd found in these mountains. And slowly, carefully, something began to grow between them. It started with small touches, his hand lingering on hers when he passed her a pup, his shoulder brushing against hers as they sat side by side watching the young wolves play. Then came the almost kisses, moments when they would lean toward each other, their lips nearly meeting before one of them would pull back, remembering all the reasons this was complicated. The pups were thriving under Sage's care, growing rapidly and starting to show their personalities. Shadow was protective and serious, already trying to herd his siblings. Luna was curious and adventurous, constantly getting into trouble. Storm was playful and energetic, never content to be still. Amber was sweet and gentle, always the first to comfort a distressed sibling. Echo was vocal and demanding, making sure everyone knew what he wanted. Nova was graceful and elegant, moving with unusual coordination for a pup, and Wise, true to his name, watched everything with those thoughtful eyes, learning from his siblings' mistakes. "They're going to be incredible wolves," Alexander said one evening, watching them tumble over each other in play, strong, intelligent, well-adjusted, despite everything they've been through. "You've done an amazing job with them, Sage." "I love them," Sage admitted. "I know they're not mine. I know they belong with your pack, but I love them like they're my own children." Alexander turned to look at her with an expression that made her heart race. "They do belong with the pack," he said carefully, "but Sage, you saved their lives. In wolf culture, that creates a bond that's recognized as sacred. You're not just their caretaker. You're their mother in every way that matters." "But I'm human," Sage protested. "I can't be a wolf mother." "You already are," Alexander replied, "and the pack wants to recognize it formally. We want to perform a ceremony to officially declare you the mother of these pups, to give you a place of honor in our pack." Sage felt panic rising in her chest. "I don't belong in your world. I don't know anything about pack culture or werewolf traditions or any of it. You belong wherever those pups are," Alexander said firmly, "and they need you, Sage. Even when they're grown, even when they can shift and hunt and fight, they'll need the human who loved them enough to save them, who cared for them when they were helpless, who chose them over her own comfort and safety." The ceremony was held on the night of the full moon, in a clearing deep in pack territory where dozens of wolves had gathered. Sage stood in the center of the circle, holding all 7 pups in her arms, while Alexander addressed the assembled pack. "This human saved the lives of 7 pups from the Frostborn bloodline," he said, his voice carrying through the night air. "She found them buried in snow, orphaned and dying, and she chose to rescue them. She spent weeks caring for them, sacrificing her sleep and her resources and her comfort to keep them alive. By the ancient laws of our people, she has earned the right to be called their mother." The pack howled their agreement, the sound echoing through the forest, and Sage felt something shift in the air around her, something ancient and powerful settling into place. Alexander approached her, his pale eyes glowing in the moonlight, and placed his hand over her heart. "Do you accept this bond?" he asked. "Do you accept the responsibility and the honor of being named mother to these pups, protector of the Frostborn line, member of our pack?" Sage looked down at the 7 pups in her arms, at their trusting faces and bright eyes, and felt love surge through her so powerfully it took her breath away. "I accept," she said clearly. The pack howled again, and Sage felt warmth flood through her chest, a connection forming between herself and the pups that was deeper than anything she'd ever experienced. She could feel them, their emotions and needs, their love and trust, and she knew that this bond would last for the rest of her life. After the ceremony, after the pack had dispersed and the pups had been settled in a specially prepared den, Alexander walked Sage back toward her cabin. "You're one of us now," he said quietly, "a member of the pack, protected and valued and honored." "Thank you," Sage whispered, "for this, for everything. I never thought I'd belong anywhere again after my divorce. I thought I was too broken to be wanted." Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "You're not broken," he said with fierce intensity. "You're not too soft or too emotional or too anything. You're exactly what you're supposed to be, exactly what we need. And Sage, I need you to understand something. That ceremony tonight, it wasn't just about the pups." "What do you mean?" Sage asked, her heart beginning to race. "I mean that from the moment I saw you holding Shadow in your arms, I felt something I've never felt before, the mate bond, the connection that forms between true mates chosen by the moon goddess herself. You're not just the mother of my sister's pups, Sage. You're my mate, the one person in all of existence created specifically for me." The words should have terrified her, should have sent her running back to her cabin and locking the door. But instead, Sage felt something click into place, an explanation for the overwhelming attraction she'd felt from the first moment she saw him, for the way her body responded to his presence, for the sense of rightness she experienced whenever they were together. I felt it too, she admitted, but I thought I was imagining it, that I was just lonely and projecting onto the first person who was kind to me. You weren't imagining anything, Alexander said, moving closer. The bond is real, Sage. And if you're willing, if you want this, I'd like to explore it properly, court you the way you deserve, show you what it means to be valued and cherished and loved by someone who sees all of you and wants everything you are. Sage looked up at him, at this powerful alpha king who'd shown her more kindness and respect in a few weeks than her ex-husband had in years of marriage. "What if I'm not good enough?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "What if I disappoint you?" "Impossible," Alexander said, cupping her face gently. "You saved 7 lives that I thought were lost forever. You gave my sister's pups a chance to grow up healthy and loved. You showed me what true strength looks like, what it means to care more about others than about yourself. You could never disappoint me, Sage. You're everything I've been searching for my entire life." When he kissed her, it was soft and gentle and full of promise. Sage melted into it, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, her body pressing against his as the mate bond blazed between them with an intensity that made her gasp. This was nothing like the empty obligation she'd felt with her ex-husband, nothing like the years of trying to be something she wasn't. This was fire and recognition and coming home to a place she'd never been, but had always belonged. They pulled apart slowly, both breathing hard, and Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to court you properly," he promised. "Take you on dates, introduce you to the pack, give you time to adjust to this world. I won't rush you or pressure you or demand more than you're ready to give." "What if I'm ready now?" Sage asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "What if I don't want to wait?" Heat flared in Alexander's pale eyes. "Then tell me what you want, Sage. Tell me what you need." "I want to feel valued," Sage whispered. "I want to be with someone who sees my softness as strength instead of weakness. I want to stop running from my own heart." "You are valued," Alexander said, his voice dropping to something rough and primal. "You're valued and cherished and absolutely precious to me. Your softness, your compassion, your ability to love deeply despite being hurt, those are the things that make you extraordinary. And I swear to you, Sage Winterborn, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget how incredible you are." He kissed her again, deeper this time, with more urgency, and Sage felt her body responding in ways it never had before. Heat pooled low in her belly, spreading like liquid fire through her veins. Her skin felt too tight, every nerve ending screaming for more contact, more touch, more of everything. When Alexander's hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer, she could feel the evidence of his desire pressing against her, and it made her breath catch. "We should slow down," Alexander said, though he made no move to step away. "You've been through a lot, and I don't want you to feel pressured or rushed into anything." "I don't feel pressured," Sage assured him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his white blonde hair. "I feel alive for the first time in years. I feel wanted and valued and safe. I feel like I can finally be myself without apologizing for it." Alexander groaned, his control clearly hanging by a thread. "Sage, if we don't stop now, I won't be able to. The mate bond, when it's this strong, when you're this close, it makes control nearly impossible. I want you so badly I can barely think, but I need to know you're sure that this is really what you want." In answer, Sage pulled his mouth back to hers and kissed him with all the passion and need she'd been suppressing for weeks. She felt his restraint shatter, felt him lift her effortlessly into his arms and carry her into her cabin, never breaking the kiss. He laid her down on her bed with surprising gentleness, and then he was above her, his weight pressing her into the mattress, his mouth trailing fire down her neck. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against her skin, "so perfect, so mine." His hands were everywhere, sliding under her shirt to explore the curve of her waist, the soft skin of her stomach, moving higher with agonizing slowness. When his fingers finally brushed against the soft swell of her chest, Sage arched off the bed with a gasp, her body desperate for more. Alexander took his time, learning every inch of her, discovering what made her moan, what made her writhe, what made her beg. Clothes became obstacles that needed to be removed, layers stripped away until they were skin to skin, the heat between them almost unbearable. Sage could feel his rigid length pressing against her thigh, thick and demanding, and she reached down to wrap her hand around him, marveling at the size and heat of him. Alexander groaned at her touch, his hips pushing into her grip, his control clearly hanging by the thinnest of threads. "I need you," Sage whispered. "Please, Alexander, I need to feel you." He positioned himself at her entrance, and Sage could feel how slick she was, how ready, her body opening for him like it had been made for this moment. When he pushed inside, slowly and carefully, giving her time to adjust to his size, they both froze at the sensation. The mate bond exploded between them, pleasure so intense it bordered on pain, and Sage found herself crying out his name as he filled her completely. "Perfect," Alexander breathed, his voice strained with the effort of holding still. "You feel perfect, like you were made just for me." He began to move then, slow, deep thrusts that had Sage seeing stars, her nails digging into his back as she wrapped her legs around his waist. The rhythm built gradually, pleasure mounting with each stroke, each slide of skin against skin. Alexander's mouth found the sensitive curves of her chest, his tongue circling and teasing until Sage was trembling beneath him, desperate for release. "Let go," he commanded, his hands sliding between their bodies to find that sensitive bundle of nerves. "Let go for me, Sage. Let me feel you come apart." His fingers worked in perfect rhythm with his thrusts, and Sage felt herself climbing higher, tension coiling tighter, until finally she shattered with a cry that echoed through the cabin. Her climax triggered his own, and Alexander buried himself deep, his release pulsing inside her as the mate bond blazed between them like a star. They collapsed together, breathing hard, their bodies still joined, and Sage had never felt more complete. Alexander rolled them so she was draped across his chest, his hand stroking gently through her hair as they both came down from the incredible high. "That was," Sage started, then couldn't find the words to finish. "I know," Alexander agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I've never felt anything like that. The mate bond, when it's consummated, it's supposed to be intense, but that was beyond anything I imagined." They lay together in comfortable silence for a while, and Sage found herself thinking about how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. From alone and broken to surrounded by love, from believing she was worthless to being honored as a pack mother, from running from connection to lying in the arms of her true mate. It was almost too much to process. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "With us? With the pups? With everything?" "Now we build a life together," Alexander said simply. "We raise those pups, we strengthen the pack, we create something beautiful out of the tragedy of Katerina's death. And Sage, I want you to know, you don't have to change anything about yourself to fit into my world. Your softness, your compassion, your tendency to rescue things that need help, those are exactly the qualities our pack needs. You're going to be an incredible Luna, an amazing mother, and the best mate I could ever ask for." The pups grew rapidly over the following months, and Sage documented every stage of their development with her camera. They started shifting between human and wolf form around 3 months old, revealing their true natures. Shadow was serious and protective, already showing signs of the alpha he would become. Luna was adventurous and curious, constantly pushing boundaries. Storm was energetic and playful, bringing joy wherever he went. Amber was gentle and empathetic, naturally attuned to others' emotions. Echo was vocal and demanding, making sure his voice was always heard. Nova was graceful and elegant, moving with unusual coordination, and Wise was thoughtful and observant, learning from everything around him. They adored Sage with a fierce devotion that brought tears to her eyes daily. Even in wolf form, they would follow her everywhere, piling onto her lap when they were small enough, sleeping in a puppy pile around her feet as they grew larger. In human form, they called her Mama, and came to her with every scraped knee and hurt feeling and moment of triumph. The pack accepted Sage with surprising ease, grateful to her for saving their future alpha's nephews and nieces, respectful of her bond with Alexander. She became known as the Soft Luna, the one who could be approached with problems and fears, who listened without judgment and helped without expecting anything in return. Her photography skills became valuable too, as she documented pack events and created portraits of families, her gentle nature putting even the shyest wolves at ease. 6 months after the ceremony that named her pack mother, Alexander proposed, not with grand gestures or public spectacle, but quietly, in the den where the pups slept, surrounded by the children she'd saved and the life they'd built together. He offered her a ring made of moonstone, a gem sacred to wolf culture, and asked her to be his mate officially, his Luna, his partner in all things. Sage said yes without hesitation, and they were married in a ceremony that blended human and wolf traditions, witnessed by the pack and blessed by the full moon. When Alexander marked her as his mate, claiming her permanently before witnesses, Sage felt the bond between them solidify into something unbreakable and eternal. A year later, as Sage sat in the clearing watching the now yearling pups play with other young wolves, she marveled at how far she'd come. From the broken, divorced woman who'd fled to the mountains to heal, to the honored Luna of a werewolf pack, mother to 7 extraordinary children, and mate to an alpha king who cherished every part of her. Alexander found her there, as he often did, and pulled her into his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her hair. "How a terrible ex-husband and a random avalanche led me to exactly where I needed to be," Sage replied. "How being too soft and too emotional turned out to be exactly what 7 wolf pups needed to survive. How the universe has a funny way of using our perceived weaknesses as our greatest strengths." "Your ex-husband was an idiot," Alexander said firmly, "but I'm grateful to him for one thing. He let you go, which meant you were free when the moon goddess brought you to that ridge at exactly the right moment. His loss became my greatest blessing. The pups noticed them and came running, tackling them both to the ground in a puppy pile of affection. Shadow, now a strong young male showing early signs of alpha power, licked Sage's face enthusiastically. Luna, graceful even in her exuberance, curled against her side. The others joined in, creating a warm, squirming mass of love and devotion. "This is my life now," Sage thought with wonder. Not the sterile, performative existence her ex-husband had wanted, but something real and messy and beautiful. She was the mother of 7, the mate of an alpha king, and the soft-hearted woman who'd proven that compassion wasn't weakness, but the greatest strength of all. Sometimes the worst moments of your life, the rejections and failures and losses, are actually the universe clearing a path to something better. Sometimes being too soft is exactly what broken things need to heal. Sometimes the weaknesses others see in you are actually the gifts the world needs most. And sometimes an avalanche and 7 orphaned wolf pups are exactly what it takes to find your true home. 2 years had passed since that fateful day on the mountain, and Sage's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The 7 pups she'd saved were now strong, confident young wolves, each displaying unique talents and personalities that made her heart swell with pride. But raising 7 werewolf children while learning to be Luna of one of the most powerful packs in the Northern Territories had its challenges that were about to become much more complicated. Sage was in the pack's training grounds, watching Shadow work with the younger wolves on defensive formations when she felt the first wave of dizziness. She steadied herself against the fence, taking deep breaths, trying to ignore the nausea that had been plaguing her for the past week. She'd assumed it was stress or perhaps something she'd eaten, but as another wave hit, followed by a familiar cramping sensation, understanding dawned with shocking clarity. She was pregnant. The realization should have filled her with joy, but instead, Sage felt panic rising in her chest. She was human, carrying a werewolf child, Alexander's child. She had no idea if that was even possible, no idea what complications might arise, no idea if her human body could sustain a shifter pregnancy. And beyond the medical concerns, there was the political reality. The pack was still adjusting to having a human Luna. How would they react to a half-human heir? Sage, Alexander's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts as he appeared beside her, his pale eyes immediately concerned. "What's wrong? I can feel your distress through the bond." She looked up at her mate, at the man who had shown her what true love meant, and decided honesty was the only path forward. "I think I'm pregnant," she said quietly. Alexander's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, joy, concern, wonder, before settling on fierce protectiveness. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hand coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Not certain, but all the signs are there," Sage admitted. "Alexander, is this even possible? Can a human carry a werewolf child? What if something goes wrong? What if the pack doesn't accept a half-human heir?" Alexander pulled her into his arms, his warmth and strength immediately calming her racing heart. "It's possible," he assured her. "Rare, but possible. My grandmother was human, mated to my grandfather, who was a shifter. She carried my father without complications. And as for the pack accepting our child, they'll accept anyone we claim because that's what family does. They'll love this baby because it's ours, because it's a gift from the moon goddess." "But what if I can't do this?" Sage whispered against his chest. "What if I'm not strong enough? You saved 7 dying pups and raised them into extraordinary wolves," Alexander reminded her gently. "You learned an entire culture from scratch and became one of the most beloved Lunas in pack history. You're strong enough for anything, Sage, and you won't be doing this alone. I'll be with you every step of the way." The pack healer, an ancient wolf named Moira, who'd delivered 3 generations of frostborn pups, confirmed the pregnancy the next day. She examined Sage thoroughly, her gnarled hands gentle as they pressed against Sage's abdomen, her eyes glowing faintly as she used some kind of supernatural sense to assess the growing life within. "You're carrying a strong pup," Moira announced with satisfaction. "About 6 weeks along, developing perfectly, no signs of complications. The child has shifter blood. I can sense it, but the pregnancy itself should progress much like a human pregnancy. 9 months, give or take, and you'll have a healthy baby in your arms." "But I'm human," Sage said, voicing the fear she'd been carrying. "Won't there be complications? Won't the shifter nature of the baby cause problems?" Moira smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "Child, you've been living among wolves for 2 years, eating our food, breathing our air, connected to our alpha through a mate bond that's stronger than most I've seen. You're not entirely human anymore, not in the ways that matter. Your body has adapted, changed on a cellular level to accommodate the bond. That's why you can carry this pup without complications. The news spread through the pack like wildfire, and Sage was overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support. Pack members she barely knew brought gifts, offered advice, shared stories of their own pregnancies. The 7 young wolves she'd raised were beside themselves, with excitement, already arguing about who would be the best older sibling, who would teach the baby to hunt, who would tell the best bedtime stories. Shadow, now an imposing young male, who stood nearly as tall as Alexander, appointed himself Sage's personal guardian. He followed her everywhere, growling at anyone who got too close, insisting on carrying anything heavier than a book. Luna, graceful and adventurous, started collecting soft things, blankets and pillows and stuffed animals, creating a nest in what would become the nursery. Storm declared he would teach the baby to run faster than the wind. Amber promised to sing lullabies. Echo said he'd make sure the baby's voice was heard. Nova began planning elaborate celebrations for the birth, and Wise, thoughtful as always, simply held Sage's hand and told her she was going to be an amazing mother. Again. But not everyone was thrilled about the pregnancy. There were wolves in the pack, traditionalists who believed in pure bloodlines, who saw a half-human heir as a threat to their way of life. Sage tried to ignore the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the sidelong glances, and barely concealed disapproval. But as her pregnancy progressed and her belly began to swell, the tension became impossible to ignore. It came to a head during a pack meeting when one of the elders, a wolf named Gregor, who'd never approved of Alexander's choice of a human mate, stood and addressed the assembled pack. "We need to discuss the succession," he said, his voice carrying through the great hall. "The Luna is carrying a child that will be half-human. We need to establish whether such a child can legitimately inherit the alpha title." The room went silent, all eyes turning to Alexander, who stood slowly, his pale eyes glacial. "Are you questioning whether my child, my heir, has the right to lead this pack?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm questioning whether a half-human has the strength necessary to be alpha," Gregor replied, not backing down. "Leadership requires power, dominance, the ability to command respect. How can a child diluted with human blood possess those qualities?" Before Alexander could respond, Shadow stood, his young voice ringing with authority that belied his age. "You question strength, Elder Gregor? Then let me tell you about strength. My mother, Sage, was human when she found 7 dying pups in an avalanche. She was human when she spent weeks caring for us without sleep, without help, without any guarantee we'd survive. She was human when she chose to love us despite knowing we'd grow into creatures that could tear her apart. That's strength, Elder. That's the kind of strength that makes great leaders." Luna stood next, her golden eyes flashing. "And you speak of dominance and command? Our mother commands the loyalty of every wolf she's helped, and she does it through compassion and understanding, not fear. She's earned more respect in 2 years than some. Wolves earn in lifetimes." One by one, the other 5 stood, each adding their voice to the defense of Sage and the unborn child. The pack watched in stunned silence as the 7 young wolves, barely more than juveniles, faced down a pack elder without flinching. These were the pups Sage had saved, and they would defend her and her child with their lives. Alexander let his children speak. Let them show the pack exactly what kind of wolves Sage's influence had created. Then he stepped forward, his alpha power radiating through the hall with such intensity that wolves throughout the room dropped their heads in submission. "My mate saved my sister's children when they should have died," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "She has proven herself worthy of being Luna 1,000 times over. And any child of ours will be raised with the same love and strength that created these 7 extraordinary wolves. If anyone has a problem with that, they can challenge me for leadership right now." The silence stretched, heavy and tense. Finally, Grigor lowered his head in submission. "Forgive me, Alpha, my Luna." I spoke out of turn. The incident left Sage shaken, but it also showed her the depth of support she had. The 7 wolves she'd raised would defend her fiercely, and Alexander would burn the world down before he let anyone harm her or their child. As her pregnancy progressed, Sage found strength in that knowledge, found courage in the bond she shared with her mate and children. The pregnancy itself was surprisingly smooth. Moira had been right about Sage's body adapting to carry a shifter child. She had the usual discomforts, morning sickness that lasted well into the 2nd trimester, swollen ankles, back pain, but nothing beyond what human pregnancies typically involved. The baby was active, especially during full moons when Sage could feel tiny movements that seemed almost like the child was trying to shift in the womb. Alexander was an attentive mate, almost comically so. He anticipated her every need before she could voice it, brought her food she was craving before she knew she wanted it, rubbed her feet and back without being asked. At night, he would rest his hand on her growing belly, talking to their child in a low voice, telling stories about the pack, about the 7 siblings who were waiting to meet them, about the mother who would love them unconditionally. "You're going to have the best family," he murmured one night, his hand gentle on her stomach. 7 older siblings who'll protect you and teach you and probably spoil you rotten. A mother who knows how to love broken things back to wholeness, and a father who'll do everything in his power to make sure you never doubt your worth or your place in this pack. Sage felt tears prick at her eyes, hormones making her more emotional than usual. "What if I'm not as good a mother this time?" she whispered. "The 7, I saved them, but I didn't give birth to them. What if it's different with a baby I carry? What if I don't know what to do?" "Then you'll figure it out the same way you figured out how to raise 7 wolf pups," Alexander assured her, "with love and determination and that incredible heart of yours. And Sage, you won't be alone. You have me, you have the 7, you have the entire pack ready to support you. This child is going to be so loved, so cherished, so protected. They're going to grow up knowing exactly how wanted they are." The labor started 3 weeks before Sage's due date, sudden and intense, pulling her from sleep with a gasp. Alexander was instantly awake, his hand finding hers in the darkness, his presence immediately calming, despite the panic she could feel through their bond. "It's time," Sage managed through the first contraction, the pack mobilized with impressive efficiency. Moira appeared within minutes, her healing supplies already prepared. The 7 young wolves, who'd been sleeping in the adjacent room, crowded into the doorway, their eyes wide with concern and excitement. Alexander sent them to alert the pack, to prepare the great hall for the celebration that would follow the birth, but Shadow refused to leave. "She's my mother," he said firmly, his young alpha power already evident. "I'm staying." Sage reached out to him, this boy she'd raised from a helpless pup, and smiled through the pain. "Stay," she said. "I want you here." The labor was long and difficult, hours of pain that tested Sage's endurance in ways she'd never experienced. Alexander stayed at her side through all of it, his hand gripping hers, his presence a constant anchor as she rode wave after wave of contractions. Shadow sat at the foot of the bed, his young face serious and concerned, occasionally offering quiet words of encouragement. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sage felt the final overwhelming urge to push. She bore down with everything she had, and Moira's triumphant cry filled the room. "A daughter?" she announced, holding up a squalling infant, a beautiful, perfect daughter. The baby was placed on Sage's chest, still covered in birth fluids, but absolutely perfect. She had Alexander's pale hair, already visible even wet, and when she opened her eyes, they were the same unusual silver as her father's, but her features, the shape of her face, and the delicate bow of her lips, those were all Sage. She was a perfect blend of both parents, human and wolf. And she was absolutely beautiful. "Welcome to the world, little one," Sage whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to your family." Alexander leaned down to kiss both his mate and his daughter, his own eyes wet. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name her?" Sage looked at her daughter, at the tiny perfect being who represented everything good that had come from her decision to save 7 wolf pups 2 years ago. "Katerina," she said softly, "after your sister, after the wolf who gave her life for her children. We'll call her Cat." Alexander's expression crumpled, emotion overwhelming him. Sage had given him back a piece of his twin, had honored Katerina's memory in the most beautiful way possible. "That's perfect," he managed. "She would have loved that." Shadow approached carefully, his eyes wide with wonder as he looked at his new sister. "Can I?" he asked hesitantly. Sage shifted slightly, making room, and Shadow sat beside her on the bed. She carefully placed baby Cat in his arms, showing him how to support her head, and watched as this fierce young alpha transformed into the gentlest big brother. "Hi, Katerina," Shadow whispered. "I'm your big brother, Shadow. I've been waiting to meet you. I promise I'll always protect you and teach you everything I know and make sure nobody ever hurts you." The other 6 crowded in, each wanting their turn to hold the baby, to make their own promises of protection and love. Sage watched them with a full heart, seeing how gentle they were, how awed, how immediately devoted to this tiny new member of their family. The pack celebration that followed was massive. Wolves from allied packs traveling from across the territories to honor the birth of the alpha heir. Sage sat in the place of honor, Cat in her arms, and received well wishes from hundreds of wolves. Even Gregor, the elder who'd questioned the baby's right to inherit, approached with obvious remorse. "Forgive an old wolf's prejudice," he said, bowing deeply. "I was wrong to question your child's strength." Looking at her now, feeling the power already radiating from her, "I know the pack will be in good hands when she comes of age." Sage accepted his apology with grace, understanding that change was hard for traditionalists, that her presence as human Luna had challenged centuries of convention. But holding Cat, surrounded by her 7 fiercely protective children and her devoted mate, she felt confident in the future they were building. As the celebration wound down and wolves began to disperse, Alexander carried a sleeping Cat back to the nursery Luna had so carefully prepared. Sage followed, exhaustion finally catching up with her, but content in a way she'd never been before her divorce had shattered her old life. "You did beautifully," Alexander said as he gently placed Cat in her cradle. "She's perfect, and you're amazing, and I love you more than I have words to express." Sage leaned against him, watching their daughter sleep, and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From broken and rejected to beloved Luna and mother of 8, from believing she was too soft to realizing her compassion was her greatest strength, from running from love to being surrounded by it in abundance. 2 years ago, I was alone on a mountain trying to heal from a divorce that convinced me I was worthless, she said quietly. And now, I'm here with a mate who cherishes me, 7 children who would fight the world for me, a pack that honors me, and a daughter who represents everything good that came from choosing compassion over self-preservation. Your ex-husband's loss? Alexander reminded her, pressing a kiss to her temple, his tremendous loss, and my incredible gain. You saved my family, Sage. You brought light back to a pack that was drowning in grief. You showed us what real strength looks like. The 7 young wolves appeared in the doorway, having obviously been listening. We wanted to say goodnight to Cat, Luna explained, and to you, Mama. Sage opened her arms, and they came, all 7 of them, creating a protective circle around her and Alexander and baby Cat. This was her pack, her family, her home, built from avalanche and tragedy and 7 tiny lives she couldn't bear to let die. Sometimes the universe breaks you, Sage thought, looking at the family surrounding her, not to destroy you, but to rebuild you into something stronger. Sometimes your greatest weaknesses become your most powerful gifts. Sometimes the softest hearts create the strongest bonds. And sometimes saving 7 wolf pups buried in an avalanche leads you to discover that you were never too broken, too soft, or too emotional. You were exactly what the world needed you to be, exactly when it needed you most. The rest was just learning to see yourself through the eyes of those who truly loved you, learning to accept that being kind in a cruel world wasn't weakness, but the bravest thing you could possibly do. Sage Winterborn, once a divorced woman who believed she had nothing to offer, was now Sage Frostborn, Luna of the Northern Territories, mother of 8, and living proof that the end of one story was often just the beginning of something far more beautiful than you ever dared to imagine. The moon goddess worked in mysterious ways, and sometimes her greatest blessings came wrapped in avalanches and impossible situations that required exactly the kind of heart too many people mistook for weakness. Sage's heart, her beautiful, compassionate, too soft heart, had saved 8 lives and built a family that would last for generations. That was strength beyond measure, power beyond comparison, and a legacy worth far more than any traditional path could ever have offered. As she stood surrounded by her family, watching the moonlight stream through the nursery window and bathe them all in silver light, Sage finally understood what her grandmother had tried to teach her years ago. Being soft in a hard world wasn't something to apologize for. It was something to cherish, something to protect, something to celebrate. Because soft hearts were the ones that saved lives, that built bridges, that created families from strangers and love from tragedy. And in the end, that was the greatest magic of all. That night, after the 7 had reluctantly gone to their own rooms and baby Cat was sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Alexander found Sage standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit forest. She was still recovering from childbirth, her body tender and tired, but there was a peaceful glow about her that took his breath away. "You should be resting," he said softly, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping gently around her waist, careful of her still healing body. "I couldn't sleep," Sage admitted, leaning back against his chest. "I keep thinking about everything that's happened, about how different my life could have been if I'd made different choices. What if I hadn't gone hiking that day? What if I'd heard those pups crying and walked away? What if I'd let fear stop me from saving them? Then 7 extraordinary wolves would have died," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion, "and I would still be incomplete, still searching for the mate I'd lost all hope of finding. The universe brought us together, Sage. Every choice you made led you exactly where you needed to be." He turned her gently in his arms, tilting her face up to his. "You're everything I never knew I needed," he continued, his pale eyes intense in the moonlight. "You took my grief and transformed it into joy. You gave my sister's children a mother who loves them unconditionally. You gave me a partner who sees me, not just the Alpha King, but the man beneath the crown, and now you've given me a daughter who's perfect in every way." Sage felt tears gathering, pregnancy hormones still making her emotional. "I love you," she whispered. "I love our family, our life, everything we've built together. Sometimes I'm terrified it's all too good to be true, that I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." Alexander leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened, his tongue sliding against hers, tasting, claiming, reminding her that this was very real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, he rested his forehead against hers. "This is real," he promised. "You're mine, I'm yours, and nothing will ever change that. The mate bond doesn't lie, Sage. What we have is forever." His hand slid down her sides, carefully avoiding her still tender abdomen, and Sage felt heat begin to build, despite her exhaustion. It had been weeks since they'd been intimate, first because of the late stages of pregnancy, and then because of the birth itself. But feeling his desire pressing against her, feeling the mate bond humming with want and need, Sage found her body responding in ways she hadn't expected. "Alexander," she breathed, her hands sliding up his chest. "We can't. I'm still recovering. It's too soon." "I know," he said, though his control was clearly hanging by a thread. "I know we can't go that far. Not yet. But Sage, I need to touch you, need to feel you, need to remind myself that you're really mine, and this isn't some beautiful dream I'm going to wake from." "Then touch me," Sage said, making a decision. "Show me I'm yours. Remind me what it feels like to be desired and cherished and wanted." Alexander growled low in his throat, a purely animal sound of need and possession, and lifted her carefully into his arms. He carried her to their bed, laying her down with exquisite gentleness, his hands immediately going to the buttons of her nightgown. He undressed her slowly, reverently, worshipping every inch of skin he revealed with hands and mouth and whispered words of praise. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against her collarbone. "So perfect, so strong, so mine. You just brought our daughter into the world, and you're even more incredible than before." His mouth trailed lower, finding the soft curves of her chest, and Sage gasped at the sensation. She was still nursing Kat, and her body was hypersensitive, every touch magnified. Alexander was careful, gentle, his tongue circling the sensitive peak without applying pressure, his teeth grazing the tender skin in ways that made her arch off the bed. "I can't," Sage protested weakly, even as her body betrayed her, responding to his touch with desperate need. "Alexander, we shouldn't. I'm not healed enough for this." "I know," he assured her, his hand sliding down her stomach, bypassing the still tender area where she'd carried their daughter, moving lower to find the slick heat between her thighs. "But I can make you feel good without risking injury. Let me pleasure you, Sage. Let me show you how much I worship every part of you." His fingers found her sensitive pearl, circling it with expert precision, and Sage felt her control shatter. She was wet already, her body desperate for this connection after weeks of abstinence, and when Alexander slid one long finger inside her, she cried out at the sensation. He was careful, gentle, making sure not to hurt her healing body, but the pleasure was intense enough to make stars dance behind her closed eyelids. "That's it," Alexander encouraged, his voice dropping to something dark and primal. "Let go for me, my love. Let me feel you come apart under my hands. You're so responsive, so perfect, so absolutely mine." He added another finger, curving them to find that spot inside her that made her see white, and his thumb continued its maddening circles on her pearl. Sage felt the pleasure building, tension coiling tighter in her core, climbing higher with every skilled stroke of his fingers. When his mouth closed around her sensitive peak, sucking gently, the dual sensations pushed her over the edge. She shattered with a cry that she quickly muffled against his shoulder, aware that they had 7 young wolves sleeping nearby who didn't need to hear their parents' intimate moments. Alexander worked her through it, his fingers maintaining their rhythm until the last aftershock faded, leaving her boneless and trembling in his arms. "Beautiful," he breathed, withdrawing his fingers carefully and bringing them to his mouth, tasting her essence with obvious relish. absolutely beautiful. I'll never get tired of watching you come apart for me, of knowing I can bring you that kind of pleasure." Sage reached down, finding the hard evidence of his own arousal straining against his sleep pants. "What about you?" she asked, her hand wrapping around him through the fabric. "You can't be comfortable like this." "I'll survive," Alexander said, though his hips pushed into her grip involuntarily. "Tonight was about you, about reminding you that you're desired and cherished. My needs can wait until you're fully healed." But Sage was already pushing his pants down, freeing his rigid length, marveling at the size and heat of him. "I may not be able to take you inside me yet," she said, her hand stroking him slowly, "but there are other ways I can please you. Let me, Alexander, let me show you how much I want you." Before he could protest, Sage shifted position carefully, mindful of her recovering body, and took him into her mouth. Alexander groaned, his hand tangling gently in her hair, his control clearly hanging by the thinnest thread. She took him deep, relaxing her throat, using every technique she'd learned over their 2 years together to drive him wild. Her hand worked what wouldn't fit, stroking in rhythm with her mouth, and she could feel him getting harder, thicker, closer to release. "Sage," he warned, his voice strained. "I'm close. You should. I'm going to." She doubled her efforts, sucking harder, taking him deeper, and Alexander came with a roar he barely managed to muffle, his release pulsing hot and thick down her throat. Sage swallowed every drop, continuing to work him through it until he was trembling and oversensitive. When she finally released him, he collapsed back on the bed, breathing hard, his eyes glazed with satisfaction. "That was," he started, then seemed to lose the words. "Necessary," Sage finished, curling up beside him carefully. "We both needed that connection, that reminder of what we have together. The mate bond craves physical intimacy, and we've been apart too long." Alexander pulled her against his chest, his hand stroking gently through her hair. "Have I told you lately that you're the most incredible woman I've ever known?" he asked. "Not in the last hour," Sage teased, then sobered. "Thank you for being patient with me, for understanding that my body needs time to heal. Thank you for making me feel desired even when I'm covered in stretch marks and leaking milk and probably smelling like spit up most of the time." "You're beautiful," Alexander corrected firmly. "Those stretch marks are evidence of the miracle you just performed, bringing our daughter safely into the world. The fact that you're nursing our child makes you even more attractive to me, not less. And Sage, you could be covered in actual mud, and I'd still think you were the most gorgeous woman alive because you're mine, and you're perfect exactly as you are." They lay together in comfortable silence, the mate bond humming contentedly between them until a small cry from the cradle announced that Kat was awake and hungry. Sage carefully extracted herself from Alexander's arms and went to feed their daughter, settling into the rocking chair by the window, with Kat nursing contentedly against her. Alexander watched them, his pale eyes soft with emotion. "This is everything I ever wanted," he said quietly. "You, our children, our pack, our life together. 2 years ago, I'd given up hope of ever finding my mate, ever having a family of my own. And then you saved 7 pups and changed everything." "The 7 pups saved me too," Sage said, looking down at Kat's tiny face as she nursed. "I was broken when I came here, convinced I was worthless, because my ex-husband had spent years telling me I was too soft, too emotional, too much of everything wrong. Finding those pups, caring for them, watching them thrive, it showed me that my softness wasn't weakness. It was exactly what they needed to survive." "And it's exactly what I needed too," Alexander added. "A Luna who leads with compassion instead of fear, who values every member of the pack regardless of their rank or status, who shows us every day what real strength looks like. You've transformed this pack, Sage. We're stronger now than we've ever been, not because we're more vicious or more ruthless, but because we're more united, more compassionate, more willing to help those who need it. The next morning, Sage woke to find their bedroom full. All 7 young wolves had crowded in, along with baby Cat, who was sleeping peacefully in Shadow's arms, and they were all watching her with varying expressions of concern and mischief. "Mama," Luna said, her golden eyes sparkling, "we have a surprise for you." Sage sat up carefully, still sore from childbirth, but healing well. "What kind of surprise?" she asked suspiciously. "The good kind," Storm assured her, bouncing with excitement. "We made you something, all 7 of us together, to thank you for being the best mother anyone could ask for." Nova stepped forward, holding out a beautifully carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a pendant, a moonstone surrounded by 7 smaller stones in different colors, each representing one of the pups. "We had it made for you," Nova explained. "The 7 stones are our birthstones, so you'll always carry a piece of each of us with you. And the moonstone in the center," Wise added, "is for Cat, for the new life you brought into our family." Sage felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the beautiful gift, at the 7 faces watching her with love and pride. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's perfect, absolutely perfect." Shadow carefully transferred Cat to Alexander's arms and came to sit beside Sage on the bed. "You saved us," he said simply. "You gave us life when we should have died, love when we had nothing, a family when we were alone. This pendant is just a small way of saying we know what you did for us, and we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to be worthy of the gift you gave us." "You're already worthy," Sage assured him, pulling all 7 into a group hug. "You're all so much more than worthy. You're my greatest joy, my proudest accomplishment, proof that love and compassion and choosing to help those in need really can change the world." Later, as the pack gathered for the midday meal, Sage wore her new pendant proudly, the stones catching the light and drawing admiring glances. She sat at the head table with Alexander, Cat sleeping in a sling against her chest, the 7 young wolves arrayed around them, and looked out at the pack that had become her family. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, broken and alone and convinced she had nothing to offer. She thought about the moment she'd heard those pups crying in the snow and made the choice to dig them out, to save them, to care for them, despite having no idea what she was doing. She thought about meeting Alexander, about falling in love with an alpha king who saw her softness as strength, about building a life that exceeded her wildest dreams. And she realized that her ex-husband had been wrong about everything. She wasn't too soft or too emotional or too focused on rescuing things. Those qualities, the ones he'd criticized and belittled, had led her to save 8 lives, including her own. They'd led her to a love deeper than she'd known was possible, to a family that valued her exactly as she was, to a purpose that fulfilled her in ways a corporate wife role never could have. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, the rejection and heartbreak that feels like the end of the world, is actually the universe clearing a path to something better. Sometimes your biggest weaknesses are actually your greatest strengths, just waiting for the right circumstances to shine. Sometimes saving lives you weren't supposed to save leads you to discover that you were never broken. You were just in the wrong place with the wrong people who couldn't see your value. Sage Frostborn, Luna of the Northern Territories and mother of 8, had learned that lesson in the most beautiful way possible. And looking at her family, at the love and joy and purpose that filled her life now, she wouldn't change a single thing about the journey that had brought her here, not even the painful parts that had seemed unbearable at the time. Because in the end, it was those painful parts that had made her strong enough to save 7 dying pups in an avalanche. And saving those pups had led her home.